SNP spokesperson Chris Stephens.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Chair of the Justice Select Committee, and can I wish him all the best for the future, and to thank him for all the work he did as Chair of the Justice Committee. I think one of his memorable moments perhaps in the last few months is to have chaired the Justice Committee in which myself and my honourable friend for Edinburgh South West were pushing the issue of the Horizon Postmasters in Scotland and what that meant for us. And I think that was actually a very intelligent session with many legal experts, and I think that he chaired that in an exemplary way and allowed that debate to continue. And I've always found him to be one of the more interesting members of the House when it comes to discussing matters like this, and I've always found him to be very fair, and I would like to wish him all the best. As I would like to wish you, Madam Deputy Speaker, all the best for you in the future. And I, like the Labour front bench, I'm going to name you as my favourite Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, you always used to tease me that I have a glint in my eye before I'm ready to speak in the chamber, and I think that I would always be kind of coy when you were suggesting that I was going to be speaking next. But genuine good wishes to you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank you for all the kindness that you've shown to me as an individual, and all the encouragement that I think you give all honourable members of the House in order to carry out our duties both to our constituents and here in the chamber. Madam Deputy Speaker, what an amazing week it's been. We find ourselves having to, and it was suggested that this bill might not make the wash-up. And I think if that had been the case, there would have been an almighty fury from the infected and affected blood community, because it did look like this was not going to make it. And I think that there was pressure applied by members in this House, members in the other place, and indeed the campaigners, to make sure that we get this bill over the line. And I'm going to confine the rest of my observations very much to the amendments in relation to the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme and setting up the Infected Blood Compensation Authority, which I welcome. I welcome that part of it, and I have, as I did earlier on in the week, the appointment of Sir Robert Francis to be the head of the Infected Blood Compensation Board. I think that was, and authority, I think that was very much an excellent appointment. But I'm here, Madam Deputy Speaker, to fulfil a constituent commitment, as many others have, and in particular Cathy Young and her two daughters, Nicola and Lisa. It was one of my first constituency cases. This was when Cathy Young came to see me in Darnley Community Centre. And I had known a bit about this issue, because obviously in Scotland with the Penrose inquiry, which was untidy, I think, to say the least. But I got more and more interested and more passionate about this, because this was a clear injustice. But I think the pity about this, and I am a great believer, as the Shadow Front Bench suggested, when it's time for an election, you don't run away from it or shy away from it. It's time for the election. But I do think some of the events in the last couple of days, in which on Monday, when my constituent Cathy Young was down here in London along with her daughters, I think some people in the government knew that the general election was going to be called 2 days later. And I think that the same people probably knew the general election was going to be called when and I don't believe the Paymaster General did, but when the Paymaster General was on his feet delivering a statement about what the compensation scheme would look like, I do believe there are some people in the government who knew the general election was going to be called the very next day. And I think we're in an unfortunate position, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that there are a lot of questions now that need answered and clarified, I believe, before Parliament is dissolved. And I'm going to raise some of them here, because we do seem to be in a bit of flux, which I think is a pity. But I'm going to take this opportunity on behalf of my constituents and the infected blood community, who have taken members of this House to their hearts, as we have taken them to our hearts. First question is, it looks like, according to the scheme and the discussions that have taken place with the Cabinet Office, that the parents of a deceased infected child will receive the same amount as a living infected child. That doesn't seem to be too right to me, and I do think that needs clarified. There's also no mention of the VCJD infection in amongst all this paperwork. There's a lot of clarity needed on the confusion between what's a widow's payment and an estate's payment. The expectation appears to be that widows are going to distribute the money paid as an estate payment. Well, that's going to be difficult for those of us who know, because unfortunately the sad reality of life is that some families don't speak to each other for all sorts of reasons, and I think that's going to be difficult. It's suggested that widows would receive £16,000. That seems to be less than the money they're getting at present. Support for distressed people, the support scheme payments which are going to end. This is leaving a lot of people, Madam Deputy Speaker, in clear distress. People are very worried about losing monthly payments from these support schemes, and it is suggested by the government that these support scheme payments will end, and we certainly need clarity, and there needs to be more discussion with the infected and affected blood community in order to ease some of those concerns. We also need clarity clearly for individual heads of loss for the infected, because frankly we would all seem to be in the dark. There's also an omission of the uplift for psychological effects. Will that be covered by the injury impact award? At the moment that is not clear, but that is clearly something that we would want to discuss. I think there also needs to be a discuss about what the psychological support services should be going forward, because this has been a difficult week and a very emotional week for many people. And lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I think this is very important, is that if people accept the interim payment of £210,000, does that mean that they then are accepting all of the compensation values that are currently on the UK Government website? So it seems to me there's a lot of clarity and a lot more discussion needs to take place. I welcome the fact that this authority has been set up. I welcome the fact that I think this House, being at its best, has forced government to move on this particular issue. There were just as many people on the Conservative side who voted for the amendment by my good friend, the Right Honourable Member for Kingston upon Hull North, as there was in other parts of the Chamber. That has to be recognised, that this is a collective cross-party attempt to address this injustice. And I hope that those questions will be answered either in writing or in discussions with that affected and affected blood community, because we are all here, I believe, to make sure that they get the justice they so richly deserve. And just to make the point that any further delays will make that justice denied. Thank you.